The first time I felt something was wrong, it wasn't loud. It was quiet, the kind of quiet that settles in your chest before your mind catches up. I remember standing in the hallway outside our guest room, holding a basket of folded laundry, when I heard my husband laugh. Not his usual polite chuckle, but a soft, unguarded laugh, the one he used to reserve just for me. And then I heard my niece's voice, low and familiar, saying his name the way family shouldn't. I froze. Not because I knew the truth then, but because something inside me recognized the sound of intimacy before my heart was ready to accept it. Before everything fell apart, my life was ordinary in the best way. Predictable. Warm. The kind of life you build slowly, brick by brick, believing it will hold because you built it with care. My husband, Robert, and I had been married for 23 years. We weren't perfect, no one ever is, but we were steady. He liked his coffee too strong, I liked mine with cream. He whistled while fixing things around the house, off-key but confident. I handled the bills, the birthdays, the remembering. We were a team shaped by time. We never had children of our own. Not for lack of trying. After years of doctors' offices and carefully worded condolences, we learned to carry that quiet grief together. It made us closer in some ways. Protective. We poured our love into other places. One of those places was my niece, Alina. Alina came to live with us when she was 13, after my sister passed unexpectedly. I still remember the day she arrived, a thin girl with wide eyes, clutching a backpack that looked too heavy for her small frame. She didn't cry when she hugged me. She just held on like she was afraid if she let go, she'd disappear too. From that day on, she was mine. I helped her with homework at the kitchen table, the smell of rice and onions filling the air while she complained about math. I braided her hair before school, even when she pretended she was too old for it. Robert drove her to soccer practice and cheered louder than anyone on the sidelines. We showed up every day in all the quiet ways that matter. When people asked if she was our daughter, I never corrected them right away. Sometimes I let the assumption sit there warm and familiar. She grew up in our house. Our routines shaped her. Our laughter echoed in her memories. I believed that love, real love, created unbreakable boundaries. I was wrong. When Alina turned 26, she came back home just for a little while. She had broken up with her long-term boyfriend and needed space to reset. That's what she told me, standing in the doorway with a forced smile and tired eyes. Of course, I said without hesitation. This is your home. At first, it felt like a blessing. The house felt alive again. She cooked with me in the evenings, played old music while we cleaned, sat on the couch scrolling through her phone while Robert and I watched the news. It felt like family, natural, easy. But small things began to shift. Robert started staying up later. I'd wake up at night to find his side of the bed cold, the faint glow of the living room light spilling into the hallway. When I asked, he'd shrug and say he couldn't sleep. Stress at work, nothing to worry about. Alina became quieter around me but lighter around him. She laughed more when he entered the room. She asked his opinion on things she used to bring to me, clothes, career plans. Little decisions that once passed through my hands. I noticed these things the way you notice weather changing, subtle at first, easy to dismiss. I told myself I was imagining it. That grief had made me sensitive. That age had made me insecure. I reminded myself of the roles we played: wife, uncle, niece, solid lines, safe lines. But lines blur when no one is watching. One evening I came home early from work with a headache. The house smelled like garlic and butter. Alina was cooking. I heard voices in the kitchen, low and close. When I stepped in, they jumped apart slightly, like teenagers caught doing nothing wrong. Robert cleared his throat. Alina smiled too quickly. "Dinner's almost ready," she said. I nodded, forcing a smile of my own, but my hands felt cold. I watched the way Robert avoided my eyes, the way Alina tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, a nervous habit I'd known since she was a child. That night I lay awake listening to the clock tick, each second pressing against my chest. I didn't want to believe what my body already knew, because believing it would mean admitting that the two people I loved most in the world were capable of crossing a line I thought was sacred. And once you admit that, nothing ever feels safe again. The next morning, I found Alina sitting at the kitchen table, scrolling through her phone, smiling softly at the screen. "Good morning," I said. She looked up, startled, and locked her phone almost too fast. "Morning, Auntie?" Her voice sounded distant. "Careful." I poured myself coffee and watched her from the corner of my eye. The way she held her phone close, the way her foot bounced under the table. Small signs, quiet alarms. I still didn't know the truth then, but the ground beneath me had already started to crack. And once it starts, no amount of pretending can stop the collapse. In the days that followed, I became a quiet observer in my own home. Not the kind who spies or snoops, not yet, but the kind who listens a little harder, notices a little more. I paid attention to pauses in conversations, to doors closing softly instead of openly, to the way energy shifted when I entered a room. It was exhausting carrying that awareness. Like holding a glass filled too close to the edge, careful not to spill what I wasn't ready to face. Our mornings used to be predictable. Robert left early for work, kissing my cheek with the same absent-minded tenderness he always had. I packed my lunch, checked the calendar, reminded him about appointments. Alina slept in, drifting down late with messy hair and bare feet, asking if there was any coffee left. Now Robert lingered. He drank his coffee slowly, standing at the counter asking Alina about her plans for the day. He remembered details. Interviews she mentioned once, names of people I didn't know. I noticed how she leaned against the counter while she talked to him, how her voice softened. I told myself it was nothing. I told myself I was being unkind, suspicious, ungrateful. After everything she had been through, losing her mother, rebuilding her life, didn't she deserve attention? And after all Robert and I had been through together, hadn't he earned my trust? Still, my chest felt tight more often than not. One afternoon I came home to find the house unusually quiet. Robert's car was in the driveway. So was Alina's. I called out their names, my voice echoing down the hallway. But no one answered. I found them in the guest room. The door was open. They were sitting on the bed, not touching, not close enough to raise an obvious alarm. Robert was holding his phone out, showing her something. Alina laughed, her head tipping back slightly. They both looked up when they saw me. "Oh," Robert said, too quickly. "Hey," Alina slid off the bed and stood smoothing her shirt. "We were just looking at pictures," she said. "From my trip, last year." I nodded, my throat dry. "I didn't know you were home. Left early," Robert replied. "Figured I'd help Alina with her resume." It sounded reasonable, responsible, familiar, but the room felt wrong. The air too still. The bedspread rumpled in a way that suggested they'd been there longer than a quick conversation would require. That night, I stood in the shower longer than usual, letting the water pound against my shoulders. I stared at the tiled wall, at the small crack near the corner that had been there for years. I wondered how many times I'd walked past it without seeing it, and how many times I'd noticed it without realizing it was growing. When you love people, you don't look for their worst intentions. You protect them from your doubts, sometimes even from yourself. A week later, I found a mug in the sink, one I never used. Robert's favorite. Inside, lipstick marks faint but unmistakable. I stood there for a long time staring at it. My reflection in the stainless steel sink looked older somehow. More tired, I rinsed the mug and put it away. Still, I said nothing, because saying something would make it real. Instead, I started pulling back in small ways. I spent more time at work. I stopped joining them in the evenings, retreating to the bedroom early with a book I couldn't focus on. I told myself I was protecting my peace, but really, I was giving them space. Space can be dangerous. One evening, as I folded laundry in the living room, I heard voices again, low, careful. I didn't mean to listen. I truly didn't, but when you hear your name spoken softly, you stop. I hate lying to her, Alina said. Robert sighed. I know, but we're not doing anything wrong. The words landed hard. We didn't plan this, he continued. It just happened. My hands trembled. I folded the same towel twice before realizing what I was doing. Alina's voice wavered. She's been so good to me. I know, Robert said gently. That's why we have to be careful. Careful, not stop, not step back, just careful. I walked quietly to the bathroom and locked the door. I sat on the edge of the tub and pressed my hands against my mouth, biting back a sound that wanted to escape. My heart pounded so loudly I was sure they could hear it. I told myself not to jump to conclusions. That emotional closeness wasn't the same as betrayal. That people could connect without crossing lines. But lines don't disappear suddenly. They fade slowly until one day you step over them without realizing how far you've gone. The next morning I found Alina's phone charging on the kitchen counter. The screen lit up with a notification. From Robert. I didn't touch it. I didn't read it. I didn't need to. The confirmation was already there, heavy and undeniable. I went to work that day and barely remember driving. I sat at my desk, staring at emails without reading them, my mind looping through memories. Alina as a child, Robert holding her shoulders when she cried, the three of us laughing over burnt dinners and old movies. I felt foolish. Complicit, like my kindness had built the very bridge they were now crossing. That evening I made a decision, not about confrontation, not yet, about truth. I needed to hear it, see it, understand exactly what I was dealing with, not the softened version they were offering each other, but the reality beneath it. Because love, even betrayed love, deserves clarity, and once I had that, I knew there would be no going back. The hardest part wasn't watching them. It was pretending I wasn't. There's a particular kind of loneliness that comes from sitting at your own dinner table, surrounded by people you love, knowing there's a truth humming just beneath the surface that no one is naming. Every fork scrape against a plate felt louder. Every laugh felt borrowed. I stopped asking questions. I stopped filling silences. I let the house speak for itself, and it did. Robert and Alina developed a rhythm I couldn't unsee once I allowed myself to see it. They never sat too close when I was around, but their eyes met often. Lingered just a second too long. They shared jokes I wasn't part of. When I spoke, they listened politely, attentively, the way people listen when they're already somewhere else. At night, Robert still came to bed, but he carried a distance with him. His arm no longer draped over my waist, his breathing turned away from me. Sometimes his phone buzzed late, and he'd slip out of bed quietly, saying he needed water or air. I started waking up before dawn, lying still, counting the seconds until he returned. I told myself I was being dignified, patient. But the truth was I was afraid that if I spoke, the fragile structure of my life would shatter completely. Afraid of what confirmation would demand from me. One Saturday afternoon, Alina asked if I could help her pick out something to wear for a job interview. She stood in front of the mirror in my bedroom, turning slowly, waiting for my opinion the way she used to when she was a teenager. "How do I look?" she asked. I studied her reflection. She looked confident. Beautiful, grown. "You look ready," I said. She smiled, relief softening her face. For a moment, I almost reached out and touched her shoulder, almost let myself believe we were still what we had been. But then I noticed Robert in the doorway, watching her with a quiet intensity that made my stomach tighten. That night I sat alone in the living room after they'd both gone to bed. The lamp cast a soft circle of light on the floor. The clock ticked steadily, indifferent. I thought about boundaries. About how we teach them to children, where to stand, what not to touch, how to respect what belongs to someone else. I wondered when we stopped teaching them to adults. Or if we assume love has already done that work for us. The next morning I followed Robert. It wasn't planned. I didn't wake up with the intention to spy. But when he said he was heading out early to run errands, something in me stood up straight and alert. I waited 10 minutes before getting in my car. I told myself I was just going for a drive. Clearing my head. But my hands turned the wheel in the direction of the cafe he liked. The one Alina had mentioned a few times recently, casually, like it was nothing. They were already there when I arrived. I parked across the street, my heart pounding so hard it made my ears ring. Through the cafe window, I saw them sitting at a small table near the back. Robert leaned forward as he spoke. Alina listened, her chin resting on her hand. Then he reached across the table. He didn't grab her hand. He didn't pull her close. He simply brushed his thumb against her fingers, a small, intimate gesture that said everything words didn't need to. I felt something inside me go very still. There it was. Not dramatic, not explosive, just undeniably real. I sat there for a long time after they left, staring at my reflection in the windshield. My face looked calm, almost peaceful. But my chest ached with a grief so deep it felt ancient. When I drove home, I didn't cry. I cleaned the house. I folded laundry. I watered the plants. I moved through my space like someone preparing for a storm they knew was coming. That evening, I asked Alina to sit with me, just the two of us. She hesitated, just slightly, before agreeing. We sat at the kitchen table, the same one where she'd done homework, where I'd patched scraped knees and celebrated small victories. The overhead light hummed softly. "There's something wrong?" she asked. I studied her face, the familiar curve of her nose, the eyes that had once searched mine for safety. "Are you happy here?" I asked instead. She blinked, surprised. "Of course. With us?" "Yes," she said quickly. Too quickly. I nodded slowly. "And Robert?" Her breath caught. "Just for a moment. He's been very supportive," she said. "We've talked a lot." I let the silence stretch. "About what?" I asked. Her hands tightened in her lap. "About healing?" I took a deep breath. "Alina," I said gently, "I need you to be honest with me." She looked up then, really looked at me, and for the first time in weeks, I saw fear in her eyes. "Nothing is happening," she said. "Not like that." I held her gaze. "Is that the truth you want to live with?" Her lips trembled. She looked away. That was all the answer I needed. Later that night, when Robert came to bed, I stayed awake. I listened to his breathing, steady and familiar, and I felt something shift inside me, a quiet resolve replacing the fear. I wasn't going to scream. I wasn't going to beg. But I wasn't going to carry their secret for them anymore. Because love doesn't survive in silence, and betrayal doesn't shrink when ignored. It waits. The day the truth finally broke, it didn't arrive with shouting or slammed doors. It came quietly, like everything else had. I woke before sunrise, the house still wrapped in that soft, uncertain blue light. Robert was already awake, sitting on the edge of the bed, tying his shoes. "Early meeting," he said, without looking at me. I watched his hands, steady, practiced, and wondered how many lies they'd learned to carry without shaking. "Robert," I said. He paused, just for a second, long enough for hope to flicker and die. "Yes, do you love me?" The question hung between us, heavy and fragile. He exhaled slowly. "Of course I do," but he still didn't turn around. That was when I knew. Not suspected, not feared, knew. Later that afternoon I came home earlier than planned. I hadn't told anyone. I didn't want to. Something in me needed the truth to be uninterrupted, unfiltered. Alina's car was in the driveway. So was Robert's. I stood there for a moment, keys still in my hand, listening. The house was quiet, too quiet. I stepped inside. Their voices drifted from the living room, low, careful, wrapped in familiarity. I moved slowly, my footsteps swallowed by the rug. I stopped just short of the doorway. They were sitting on opposite ends of the couch, space between them, like they'd rehearsed restraint. Robert was speaking softly. "We can't keep doing this," he said. Alina's voice trembled. "I know. But I don't know how to stop." Silence. "I never meant for it to hurt her," Robert continued. "She's my wife." "And she's my aunt," Alina whispered. The words landed like glass shattering inside my chest. I stepped into the room. They both looked up at once. No one spoke. The clock on the wall ticked loudly, marking time no one could undo. "How long?" I asked. My voice surprised even me. "Calm. Steady." Alina's eyes filled with tears. Robert stood slowly, like someone afraid of making the wrong move. "Say it," I said. "I deserve that much." Robert swallowed. "It didn't start the way you think." I let out a short, breathless laugh. "It never does." Alina stood up, shaking. "Auntie, don't," I said softly. "Please don't." She stopped. I turned to Robert. "How long?" He looked at the floor. "Months." The room tilted. "Months," I repeated. "In my house, it wasn't physical," he said quickly. "Not at first." I closed my eyes. "That's not the defense you think it is," I said. Alina sobbed quietly, covering her mouth. "I never wanted this. I swear, I was lonely. He listened. He made me feel seen. I finished." She nodded, tears spilling over. I turned back to Robert. "And you?" He hesitated. I felt needed. The words stung more than I expected. Was I not enough? I asked. He didn't answer. That silence was the loudest thing in the room. I sat down slowly, my knees weak. I thought of every meal I'd cooked, every night I'd waited up for him, every way I'd opened my home and my heart. "You watched me care for her," I said quietly. "You watched me love her like my own. And you let this happen." Alina fell to her knees in front of me. "I'm so sorry. I never meant to take anything from you." I looked down at her, this child I had raised. This woman who had crossed a line she could never step back from. "You took something?" I said gently. "Even if you didn't mean to?" Robert reached out, but I held up my hand. "No," I said. "I need you to hear me." They both froze. "This wasn't an accident," I continued. "It was a choice made over and over again. Every conversation you hid, every look you thought I didn't see." Robert's voice cracked. "I don't want to lose you." I met his eyes then, really met them. "You already did." The words settled with a finality that surprised us all. Alina sobbed openly now. "What do you want me to do?" she asked. I took a deep breath. My chest ached, but my mind was clear. "I want you to leave," I said. "Tonight." Her head snapped up. "Please." "This house was your refuge," I said. "But you broke the trust that made it one. You can't stay here anymore." She looked to Robert, desperate. He said nothing. I stood. "And you," I said to him, "will sleep in the guest room. We will talk later, when I can breathe again." Neither of them argued. That night I packed Alina's things in silence, folded her clothes the way I had when she was younger, placed them gently into suitcases. At the door she turned to me one last time. "I loved you," she whispered. "I know," I said. "But love needs boundaries to survive." The door closed behind her with a quiet click. I stood there long after she left, my hand resting on the wood, feeling the absence settle in. Behind me the house was still, but nothing inside me was. The days that followed felt unreal, like I was walking through my own life wearing someone else's shoes. Everything looked the same, but nothing fit. Alina was gone. Her room sat quiet, the bed neatly made, the air holding on to the faint trace of her perfume, something floral and light that now made my stomach tighten. I closed the door and didn't open it again. Robert moved through the house carefully, like a guest who knew he'd overstayed his welcome. He slept in the guest room, showered at odd hours, avoided the kitchen when I was there. When we passed each other in the hallway, he looked at me with something close to shame, but never quite reached remorse. On the third night, he asked if we could talk. I was sitting at the dining table, staring at an unpaid bill I'd already looked at 3 times without processing. The overhead light buzzed faintly. "Not yet," I said. He nodded and walked away. I needed time, not to calm down, but to understand what I was feeling. Because it wasn't just anger. It was grief layered on top of grief. I'd lost a niece and a marriage in the same breath, and both losses carried different kinds of pain. When I finally agreed to talk, we sat across from each other in the living room. The same couch where I'd overheard their confessions now held the weight of what came after. "I need honesty," I said. "Not excuses." Robert folded his hands together. "I know. Why her?" I asked. He stared at the floor. "She needed me. I waited." I pressed. He sighed. "You've always been strong, capable." I didn't feel necessary anymore. The words cut deep, but they also clarified something I'd been circling for weeks. "So instead of talking to your wife," I said slowly, "you chose the one person who trusted us both." He nodded. "I didn't mean for it to go that far. It always goes that far," I replied quietly. "When you don't stop it." He reached for my hand, then stopped himself. "I still love you," he said. I studied his face, the familiar lines, the man I'd built a life with, and for the first time I saw him clearly. Not as my husband, not as my partner, but as a man who had chosen comfort over character. "Love isn't the problem," I said. "Respect is." Silence settled between us. I want you to leave, I said finally. His head snapped up. What? Not forever? I clarified. But not here. I need space to decide who I am without the lies filling this house. He opened his mouth to argue, then closed it. Where will I go? He asked. That's not my responsibility anymore, I said. He left 2 days later with a suitcase and a box of books. The door closed behind him softly, but the finality echoed through every room. The house felt emptier and strangely lighter. Word spread faster than I expected. Family called. Some with concern, some with questions disguised as concern, a few with judgment they didn't bother hiding. My sister-in-law asked, "Are you sure you didn't misunderstand?" A cousin suggested, "These things happen. It's better to forgive?" I listened. I thanked them, and then I stopped answering. I didn't announce the truth, but I didn't hide it either. When asked directly, I said simply, there was a betrayal. I chose peace. Alina didn't reach out at first. Weeks passed. Then one evening, a letter arrived. Her handwriting was familiar, careful, slightly slanted. She wrote about confusion, about grief, about how she hadn't realized how far things had gone until it was too late. She apologized for hurting me, for crossing a line she could never uncross. She asked for forgiveness. I read the letter twice, then placed it in a drawer. Forgiveness, I'd learned, isn't a transaction. It doesn't arrive on demand. What arrived instead was clarity, without Alina in the house. I noticed how much of myself I'd given away without realizing it. Without Robert, I felt the quiet hum of my own needs, long ignored, begin to speak. I rearranged the living room. Donated clothes I no longer wore. Took long walks in the evenings, letting the air cool my skin and my thoughts. One afternoon, I stood in front of the mirror and saw something different in my eyes. Not bitterness, strength. The betrayal had taken something from me, yes, but it had also given me back myself. I realized that raising someone like your own doesn't mean they own your boundaries. That marriage doesn't survive on history alone. That love without respect is just a habit, and habits can be broken. The truth doesn't stay contained for long. It seeps through cracks, slips into conversations, finds its way into rooms you never invited it into. I learned that quickly in the way people started looking at me differently, softer, cautious, curious. It began with a family dinner I almost didn't attend. My cousin was celebrating her anniversary, and despite everything, I decided to go. I didn't want my life to shrink just because others had crossed lines. I dressed carefully, choosing something simple and familiar, and drove over with my hands steady on the wheel. When I arrived, the room buzzed with conversation. Laughter floated over clinking glasses. For a moment everything felt normal. Then the whispers started, not loud enough to confront, not quiet enough to ignore. She's here alone. I heard it was complicated. Poor thing. I smiled, I hugged people. I answered questions about work and weather. But beneath it all, I felt exposed, like my private pain had become a public exhibit. Halfway through the evening, my sister-in-law approached me, her expression tight. Alina's been staying with a friend, she said, as if delivering neutral information. She's having a hard time. I nodded. I imagine she is. She feels terrible, she continued. She didn't mean to hurt you. I met her gaze calmly. Intent doesn't erase impact. The conversation ended there. Later that night, Robert showed up. I hadn't expected that. He stood near the doorway, scanning the room until his eyes found mine. For a brief moment, I saw the man I once loved, uncertain, hopeful, out of place. He approached slowly. Can we talk? Hair, I asked. He hesitated. Maybe outside. We stepped onto the back porch, the air cool and quiet compared to the noise inside. I didn't know you'd be here, he said. I didn't know you'd come, I replied. He ran a hand through his hair. I wanted to show up, face things. I studied him, or manage how they look. He flinched. People are talking, he said. They don't know the whole story. They know enough, I said. And I'm not interested in correcting them. He sighed. Elena's struggling, I'm sure. I said, she misses you. The words landed softly, but they still hurt. I miss who she used to be, I said. That's not the same thing. He looked at me then, really looked as if seeing the distance for the first time. Do you think there's any chance? No, I said gently. Not right now. We stood in silence, the porch light casting long shadows between us. When we went back inside, I felt lighter. The conversation hadn't given me answers, but it had given me confirmation that I was done explaining myself to people who wanted neat endings. A week later, the truth became impossible to ignore. Alina posted a long message online, vague but emotional. She spoke about mistakes, about loving the wrong person, about losing family. The comments filled quickly with sympathy. I read it once, then closed the app. I didn't comment. I didn't defend myself. I let silence speak. Not everyone approved of my choices. Some relatives found I was too harsh. Others admired my restraint. A few quietly pulled me aside and said, I would have done the same. What surprised me most was how many women told me they'd experienced something similar, boundaries crossed, trust eroded, their kindness mistaken for permission. There was power in that shared understanding. One afternoon, Alina showed up at my door unannounced. I saw her through the window, standing on the porch, shoulders hunched, hands clasped tightly in front of her. I didn't open the door right away. When I did, we stood facing each other, the space between us heavy with history. "I just wanted to see you," she said. I nodded. "You've seen me. I'm not here to ask for anything," she said quickly. I wanted you to know I'm in therapy. I'm trying to understand why I did what I did." I studied her face, thinner now, older somehow. "That's good," I said. She swallowed. "Do you hate me?" I thought about the question carefully. "No," I said. "But I don't trust you. And I don't know when or if that will change." Tears spilled down her cheeks. "I understand." "I hope you do," I said. "Because understanding is where growth starts." She nodded and stepped back. As she walked away, I felt a mix of sadness and relief. Some doors, I realized, don't slam shut. They close slowly, gently, with intention. That night I sat alone with a cup of tea, the house quiet and steady around me. I thought about justice, not the loud kind that demands punishment, but the quiet kind that restores balance. I had chosen myself, and that choice had rippled outward, changing the shape of everything. Healing doesn't arrive all at once. It comes in pieces, uneven, unpredictable, slipping into your life when you aren't looking for it. I learned that slowly, through ordinary days that no longer felt quite so heavy. The house changed with me. I painted the guest room a soft, muted green and turned it into a small reading space. I replaced the old couch with one that faced the window instead of the television. I let light in where shadows had settled for too long. Robert called occasionally. At first, I let the phone ring. Later, I answered, briefly, politely, without opening old wounds. He told me he'd started therapy, that he was trying to understand why he'd confused attention with affection. I listened, not because I owed him anything, but because listening no longer cost me my peace. "I don't expect forgiveness," he said once. "I just want you to know I'm trying to be better. I hope you do become better," I replied. "For your own sake, not for mine." The distance between us felt right, necessary. Like setting a broken bone and allowing it to heal without interference. I began doing things just for myself, small things at first. Morning walks with no destination. Cooking meals I liked, not meals that pleased others. Saying no without explanation. One afternoon, while sorting through old photos, I found one of Alina as a child, sitting on the kitchen floor, crayons scattered around her, her tongue poking out slightly as she concentrated. My chest tightened. I didn't throw it away. I placed it in a box labeled memories, not promises. There's a difference. Months passed. Seasons shifted. The sharp edges of betrayal dulled into something more manageable, not forgotten, but understood. I learned that boundaries don't mean bitterness. They mean clarity. That love can exist alongside distance. That choosing yourself doesn't make you cruel, it makes you honest. One evening, I attended a small gathering with friends. Laughter came easily, surprising me. Someone asked if I'd ever consider loving again. I smiled. Right now, I'm learning how to love my life. And I meant it. I stopped measuring my worth by who stayed or who left. I measured it by how I showed up for myself, with patience, integrity, and grace. The betrayal had fractured my family, yes, but it had also forced truths into the light about entitlement, about silence, about the quiet ways people cross lines when no one stops them. I hadn't lost my dignity, I had claimed it. If there's one thing the season of my life taught me, it's this. Love without boundaries isn't love, it's vulnerability waiting to be taken advantage of. For years, I believed that giving more would keep people closer. That sacrifice was proof of loyalty. That silence was strength. But I learned the hard way that when you don't protect your place in your own life, someone else will decide where you belong. I didn't lose my niece because I was too kind. I didn't lose my marriage because I wasn't enough. I lost them because two people made choices that crossed lines they knew existed. And choosing myself afterward wasn't revenge. It was survival. Healing didn't mean forgetting. It meant remembering who I was before I started shrinking to keep the peace. It meant learning that dignity can be quiet and justice doesn't always need an audience. Sometimes, the bravest thing you can do isn't holding on. It's letting go, without bitterness, without cruelty, and walking forward with your head high and your heart intact. So I'll ask you this. If you were in my place, would you have stayed silent to keep the family together, or would you have chosen yourself, even if it meant standing alone? Let me know in the comments. And if this story touched something in you, if you've ever had your trust broken by someone you raised, loved, or protected, you're not alone here. Thank you for listening. And until next time, take care of your heart.